So we're starting. On the quiz at the end, you guys have to grade the presentation on how useful, how interesting, blah, 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 blah. Most of you have never been given any instructions on how to grade a presentation. So here's what you need to know. If we look at this graph, this is people's attention span now at the beginning of the lecture. And over time, people's attention span is high, it drops off, they're sleeping, and they wake up near the end of the lecture. This is normal for most lectures because this is normal human behavior, and this drop-off point is about 8 minutes. Anybody who continues to do the same thing, for more than 8 minutes, you're going to be sleeping because you're going to be bored. Good presenters never do anything for more than 8 minutes. If I'm talking for 8 minutes, I'll then stop and I'll do something else, like play you a video clip. And when we change to something new, the attention goes back up. And then after 8 minutes of the video, you're getting bored. Then I do something new and say, look at this graph, look at this graph, look at this graph. That brings it back up. And then when you're getting bored, I say find a partner, chat to your partner. And then after 8 minutes of doing that, I keep changing what we do. I keep changing the modality, audio, visual, photo, talking. You can keep the audience's attention high. Anybody who just stands talking and 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 talking is going to bore you to tears. So when you're looking for a good lecture, you're looking for multimodality, audio, video, photos, talking, communication, changing in regular paces. This makes a presentation good. Anybody who doesn't do this makes you bored and sleepy. So bear in mind these points when you are actually judging presentations. So, on that note, let's get started. So, today we're going to be looking at media and propaganda and how Web 2.0 has kind of changed the way that media and propaganda works. So, let's see, my book control works. My book control's off, battery on it. I'm on. Okay, so something is changing. Here's the old mass media. The old mass media is newspaper, radio, and TV. How many people read a newspaper every day? Not many hands going up. Ask your parents and your grandparents, and it will be almost all of them. How many people listen to the radio every day? Not very many hands. TV? Much more hands. Internet? Almost all the hands. So we can see the old media is not so popular with young people. But one of the problems with the old media is that the old media was controlled by the elites, the powerful, the rich. And money really talks with the old media. And there's a really good book about this by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman. It's called Manufacturing Consent. And basically for the old media, they said there are 5 things that can control and change the old media. The first of them is ownership. If you own the media, you can control the media. If I make my newspaper the Rab Shimbun, I can say what's in it. If I say to him, he's my journalist, go and write a story about the football, go and write a story about the politics, go and write a story about the environment. If I don't like their story, it doesn't get in my newspaper because I own it. If you own it, you have power. And if we look here, we can see that in the US, the numbers of corporations that own the media has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. This means a very small number of corporations own most of the radio, TV, and newspapers, the old traditional style media. So they control what you get to see. The second way of controlling is advertising. This was a survey of 150 media editors, magazine editors, newspaper editors, journal editors, and all of these media had advertising. And this graph shows the number of companies that advertise, that ask the media to kill the story. So maybe, for example, just taking an example, maybe a company, let's call it Corporation A, gives the newspaper lots of money to advertise their products. And the newspaper has found a bad story about Company A. So Company A can say, please don't put that story in your newspaper and we will continue to give you advertising money. Put the story in the newspaper and we will stop the advertising money. And look at this. Almost 40% of the editors killed the story to keep the advertising money. Now in Japan, think of all the scandals. Snow brand milk, meat hope, Shiro Kaibito cookies. Think of all those scandals involving products. They're the 60% that you know about. There's probably another 40% which were killed. You never got to hear this because the advertisers have money. The third thing which can control the media is access. So this is the presidential briefing room in the White House. You can't just walk in there. Only selected journalists are allowed to go in there. And many of the journalists who would ask really tough questions don't automatically get the press pass. The journalists that do, most of them don't ask the tough questions. And you have an even worse situation in Japan with the Keisha clubs. The Keisha club journalists, if they ask a difficult question, they might not get to stay in the Keisha club. So there's a power here to make them ask softball questions. And again, that's a way of controlling the news. The fourth filter is what's called flack, and this is a threat. If we think of the advertising as the access as being the carrot, this would be the stick. Imagine we have a really big corporation B, and my Rab Shimbun, my Rab newspaper, has a bad story about that corporation. That corporation could say, if you print this story, we will take you to court. Now, even if it's true, I'm not as big as Corporation B. I don't have enough money for lawyers to fight them for years in the court. It's easy for me just to say, fine, I'll kill the story to avoid the problem. And that's another way of killing media stories. Now, the last one is ideology. This is about the thinking of the people who run the newspapers, and it's very similar to the elites. So, I've been talking for a certain number of minutes. Now it's time to do some multimodality. You're going to watch a short video clip. And this is a video clip from the BBC News. And most people think the BBC News has quite a good reputation, but they also have their institutional biases. So for example, the video that you're going to see is BBC reporting of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we're going to see some words flashing up on the video. And there's a couple of things going on in the video. This is a video from a few years ago when an Israeli soldier was captured by Palestinian soldiers or terrorists, depending on which term you want to use. Now, if he's a soldier and he's captured, we should say captured, we should say taken prisoner. But the BBC always says kidnapped. Kidnapped, kidnapped, kidnapped. But kidnapped is the wrong word to use for soldiers in a conflict. It should be taken prisoner or captured. But when the Israelis take away Palestinian civilians, we should use the word kidnapped. And the BBC never uses the word kidnapped. Took away, arrested, detained, picked up. So the bias is there in the choice of words. Let's look.
Israeli forces are maintaining the pressure on the Palestinians as they try to recover the soldier kidnapped last week. They've detained dozens of senior officials from Hamas, the militant group which swept to power earlier this year. Those officials include ministers taken in raids on the West Bank, but the focus remains on Gaza as the search for the soldier continues.
In Ramallah on the West Bank, soldiers took away 8 Hamas ministers, 25 MPs and dozens of their officials. The Israelis raided this place last night to send a very strong message about who's boss around here. The message is, if Israel wants you, it can get you. Doesn't matter who you are. The Israeli government's also made it clear that it's prepared to start assassinating Hamas leaders again, up to and including the Prime Minister.
The raid on Sunday took Israel by surprise. Now it has to find its kidnapped soldier.
We'll do whatever is necessary in order to bring it back. Israel kidnapped Gilad back to his home.
Israel's aim behind bombing this bridge and several others is to slow down movement in Gaza. In particular, it's to try to stop the kidnappers from moving the hostage from one part of Gaza to another.
The BBC has reached the Hezbollah stronghold of Baalbek, where Israeli commandos carried out a nighttime snatch and grab raid on suspected militants.
Those we met confirmed that several people have been taken in the raid. Today, Israel said it had snatched key regional Hezbollah leaders. The group said it won't be any civilians.
So look at the words used. When they're describing the Palestinians, it's a militant group that swept to power. Very negative terminology. When they're talking about Hezbollah, they say a Hezbollah stronghold. But these kind of negative words by the BBC, they're never used to describe the Israeli government sweeping to power, being militant. They never describe Tel Aviv as being an Israeli stronghold. So there's a bias in the language here on the BBC TV. Now in the UK, this bias is also shown in print. These are two world leaders who died over the last year or so. Chavez, look at the headline, it says a rotten legacy. But Chavez was the leader in Venezuela who for the first time ever brought free medical care to the poor people. For the first time ever, he enabled poor people to learn to read and write, and he dramatically increased literacy levels. For the first time ever, he enabled poor people to go to university for free. And his is called a rotten legacy. Thatcher is called a freedom fighter, but she had a horrible legacy. In the UK, many people call her Margaret Thatcher milk snatcher, because she was the one who cancelled the free milk programme for poor kids at school. She was the one who started the idea of paying to go to university. She was the one who stopped a lot of the funding for the NHS, yet she's called a freedom fighter. These differences can only be there if there's an ideological bias in the media, and that's what we're seeing. So, if the elites have a control over the media, they can show what we want, what they want us to see, and hide what we don't. So I'm going to show you a very short video clip. And this video clip, I got it from YouTube, from a Russian TV station. It has not been shown on Italian TV. Because the person in the video clip is Silvio Berlusconi, a very powerful political and media figure in Italy. Does everybody know Silvio Berlusconi? Very powerful Italian businessman, media owner, politician, very powerful man. This is him in the video. Watching? No one is watching. No one is watching. I'm eating it. Breakfast of champions. Eating your bogey. This guy was PM of Italy. He was the Prime Minister of Italy. He controlled loads of radio, TV, and newspapers. So of course, this was not on Italian TV, but the video clip was shown in other countries' TVs where he did not control. So you can see there's an element of control going on here. Even this. Let's look at this. This is probably the biggest newspaper in London. The Evening Standard is a London newspaper. And this is a front page photo of when the British and the American forces had taken Iraq. And this was supposed to show thousands and thousands of Iraqis celebrating. Now, there's something really strange about this photograph. Can anybody see the strange thing in the photo? Something very, very strange. Anybody see it? Something super strange.
Everyone's looking at the camera.
No, look at this guy here. He's got a white jacket, he's got a black shirt, he's got a moustache, and he's got a There's the same guy again. He's got the white jacket, the black shirt, the moustache. It was photoshopped. So there were only a few people, and they photoshopped it to make it look like it was many, many people. And this was the front page of the London Evening Standard. Many people saw this photo where we see, hundreds, maybe even thousands of Iraqis pulling down the statue. Have anyone seen this before? It's a very famous photo, and it's always the close-up. Let's take a wide-angle look. And in the wide-angle look, we can see here are American tanks to keep most of the Iraqi people away. And the people who are in here are Iraqis who were brought from the US. And those tanks are actually kind of protecting them, and we don't get to see the wide-angle shot. Now, this kind of photographic control is very common in the media. If anyone knows anything about photography, you can adjust the lens of the camera and the depth of field to put things behind in focus or out of focus. Now, in the Christian world, people who are very good, very holy, high-level Christians have a halo. You guys know the halo, yeah? George Bush has a halo. You think this was an accident? What's happening is the PR people have deliberately put all the photographers in a special place so that everybody is taking the same shot, and the presidential seal gives him a halo. The same here with the lights. Lord Bush. This is no accident. Bush as fighter pilot. Now the next one, how many people know Mount Rushmore? It's kind of famous American mountain, has all the really, really, really good, really famous American presidents. Here we are, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's George Bush. You think that's an accident? They have deliberately put people in a place to make that automatic. Can I borrow you a second? Can you come here? Just stand here. Stand here. So imagine he's our politician, and he's standing here, yeah? Now on the board, I can write idiot, I can write genius. Now I think he's a very good student. I'm deliberately going to put all the cameramen here so the word genius is above his head. I can do that on purpose. If I say, okay, every photographer over here, this is the photographer area, I can control that there's always, every newspaper is going to have a genius above his head. Thanks, you can have a seat. So this is the kind of control that goes on. Now, this is the kind of thing that we don't see. George Bush had a fetish. Now, this means he would probably like Dan, because if we look here, we can see that George Bush's fetish is that he really, really, really likes people who have bald heads. That's his hand. And there's one more. Now, these are all photos that I found on the internet. There's hundreds of them. But if you do a Google search on the New York Times, the Washington Post for George Bush bald fetish, you won't find any stories. Because it's not in the media. Now, don't want to just target Bush. You think this was an accident? Believe. That's just the same. Now, what we don't see? When Obama first won, a student made this to make Obama's face look like the Joker from the Batman movie and mocked it up to make it look like a Time cover. And the student just put that on his Flickr account. And Flickr deleted it. because they didn't want to annoy powerful people. That kind of censorship goes on all the time. So in the media, taking the Iraq war as an example, we see these kind of photos, Iraqi people welcoming the soldiers. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. If you're squeamish, easily shocked, you might not want to see the next photo. This was never shown in the newspapers. There's a little girl dead. Her legs are blown off, and that's her father holding her. And that was too graphic for the newspapers. We weren't allowed to see that. We weren't allowed to see this. This was too graphic for the newspaper. Dead baby in a ditch. Bang, same with this. These were not shown in the newspaper because these were too horrible. But this is what really happens in a war. Innocent people get killed. Babies get killed. The newspaper is supposed to tell us news. This is news that happens, and we weren't allowed to see it because the newspapers, the powerful elite media, control what we see and what we don't see. That control is all around us. Now, in the modern times, since the rise of the internet and Web 2.0, we still have the same problems. This was the UK a couple of years ago, and there was a big student demonstration. They were demonstrating against the cost of being a university student going up and up and up. And some of the students demonstrated, and we can see what's happening here. This is one of the big shopping streets in London, and the student is kicking in the window, and some other people have made a fire. And it's on 3 of the really, really good newspapers, the big broadsheet newspapers. Even the smaller tabloid, lower quality papers, they've all got the same story and the same photo. Even some of the free papers, the Metro's free, the Financial Times is just business, they all have the same photo. Even the terrible newspaper that's more famous for naked girls than News has the same photo. Now something interesting is happening here. If a photographer takes that photo, he usually sells it to one newspaper which pays the highest money. How did all of those newspapers get the same photo? Not easy. Unless there were lots of photographers there. But how did all the photographers know to be there at the same time? Well, something interesting, when we look at all of these photos is a close-up photo. We don't see what's happening here, we don't see what's happening here, we don't see what's happening here. This is blurred out of focus, blurred out of focus. Let's look at a real big, sharp focus photo. Look at this. What? Too much? Come on. Okay, we can see there's a whole ring of photographers there. And if you look really closely, we can actually see there's some policemen there just watching, doing nothing. And look at how many cracks are on that window. That's not one kick. Bang. And another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. And the police are standing watching. And they go camping quite a lot. It's not quick and not easy to start a fire. It takes some time. And yet the police are standing watching. Now, interestingly, this photo being on the front page of all of those newspapers made the students look bad and gave the government support. Now, we don't see this person's face. Maybe he was a real protester. Maybe he was an agent provocateur. Maybe he was a policeman pretending to be a student. We don't know because we can't see the face. Now, in the UK, there was a famous incident where there was a demonstration and 2 people in the protesters were being very violent and very aggressive. And other protesters took photos of them and found out that they were undercover police, making the protesters look bad. So because of that, maybe that's why the guy's face is hidden. We don't know. Now, that photo was only possible because normal people were there and took photos on their phones and they put it on the internet. And this is where the internet makes a big difference to us. Because if we look here, we can see a whole load of different things which are online that people can share. Different Web 2.0 media. You don't just download information from the internet. You can can upload as well. You can be a citizen journalist. So this digital power gives people power that traditionally in the past only belonged to the media. So with this new system come new opportunities. You are no longer someone who just buys the newspaper, reads the news, watches TV news, listens to the radio news. You could make your own blog. You could go to Shibuya. You could write about what's happening and put it up there, and you're becoming a citizen journalist. And your viewpoint might be even more valid than the traditional media because you don't have any access or advertising or any of those other filters to hide the news. So YouTube is a very good example. This is quite a horrible video, and this is in Egypt, in Cairo, during the uprisings, the demonstrations. And we can see a man here walking down the street. He's holding his arms out, he's opening his jacket to show he has no weapons. And over here we can see two policemen with rifles. You can see the other policeman here. He's showing them, look, I have no weapons. He's taking his jacket off. He's turning around. The police are coming closer. So the man decides to walk away. He's unarmed. He's walking away. He's turning around to walk away. He's walking away. And they killed him. That wasn't on the Egyptian TV. That wasn't on Egyptian newspapers. It was on YouTube. Because those people from the balcony had their own phone with the camera. They recorded it. And that's the only reason we know that happened, because they became citizen journalists. Now this whole idea of the citizen journalist, this started at the Seattle protests. This was about 15 years ago maybe. And the WTO was having a big meeting in Seattle. This was maybe in '99, I think. And prior to this, there were no citizen journalists. There was no online news blogs. There was only New York Times, CNN, BBC. There was only the big traditional elites. So lots of demonstrators wanted to go and protest against the WTO. And they knew that they would have some problems with the police and the media. So all of the people who were demonstrating took their own phones with cameras, took their own video cameras, and started recording their own footage of what happened. And this is some clips from a really good video called "This Is What Democracy Looks Like" by Big Noise Press. They put them all together and made a documentary video showing you what happened. Now this is the first day of the protests. And these people, they're all peaceful protesters. They're sitting down. Now what they're doing is called civil protest. They're lying down in the roads so the WTO bosses' cars cannot get through to the meeting. They're being peaceful. They're not arresting anybody. They're linking their arms together. They're sitting down. Peaceful protest. Now listen to this policeman. Essentially, he says, if you don't attack us, we won't attack you. Haven't hurt anybody in 30 years, I'm not going to start now. So the people are actually saying, who's cops? Our cops. Who's police? Our police. They're showing solidarity with the police. They're saying we're peaceful. And the police are saying, if you're peaceful, we'll be peaceful. All very good. Day one. Unfortunately, on day one, the protesters were successful and the WTO bosses could not get to the meeting. So this made the police change because the police were given new orders. Now, wait till you see what happens. You're going to see the same policeman in a moment.
Restricted the box, and it's hard to break out, to be free. So that was one of the magnificent things about being in Seattle. That day, people didn't feel helpless. That was normal to not be helpless.
We will forcibly remove you. This is the same guy a moment ago who was saying we won't hurt anyone if you're peaceful. Chemical means pepper spray in the eyes, and pain compliance means hitting people with sticks and shooting them with rubber bullets. But it's the same people doing the same peaceful protest, and this is very different from what he said yesterday. Same peaceful protesters. And not only did they spray the pepper spray in peaceful protesters' eyes, they actually went right up to people and pulled their mask off and put them really in and point blank range, which is very dangerous. Now, look at how many people are being injured, or being sprayed, or being beaten with sticks, shot with rubber bullets, dragged to the ground. These are peaceful protesters in the US, in Seattle, in 1999. Protesters. There's a guy being beaten by 4 policemen with sticks. Now this guy, look at that canister, he goes right up to someone's face and pulls their mask off and sprays it right in their face at point blank range. That can blind people. Think of how many people are being injured, sick, hurt, cut, breathing problems, probably hundreds. This is some major stuff going on. We would expect this to be on the news, in the newspaper, on the TV, on the radio, and so on. But most of that video footage you just watched has never been on US TV. The media told a very different story. Now, remember the mainstream mass media, the MSM as we call it, their purpose usually is to serve those in power. They usually only have very limited critiques of the powerful. So let's look at what the media reporting said. This was now after those clips we just saw. We're going to hear interviews with some people who were there, and then the media's reports.
As we got to Second Avenue, there was a group of maybe 2,000 people, and they were moving from our left to our right. It was obvious they were running from something.
And there are children in that crowd. And they're having these tear gas canisters fired into the crowd, and there are children there.
rioted to the voice of the people. It wasn't a riot by any means of the word, but it was a manifestation of the people's voice, and the response by the police department was one of the most significant turning points. It told everybody.
And most of those police don't look like police, they look like soldiers. They're wearing the body armor, they've got the helmets, they've got the heavy weapons. These are not soldiers, these are police. And they're in armored cars. But most of these protesters are unarmed, it's peaceful protest. Look at their banner, with lots of holes in it from rubber bullets.
We had a rally on the docks, and we went through the high market, and came up to the corner and saw those police chasing the kids down the street. These are the same kids who've been marching with us. They weren't doing anything wrong.
People like this. And I think trade unionists just a matter of days before we said we should be out there calling.
All of these people that you're hearing speak were people who were there. And they were not interviewed by the media. They were interviewed by the independent media who made this movie. But the mainstream media, the big newspapers, the TV, radio, did not interview these people who were there, who saw it.
When they saw people that they had marched with on Tuesday, that they had developed relationships with on Tuesday, being beaten and being gassed. Right?
I'm just so ashamed of my country right now. I'm crying over here. Yes, but I'm crying anyway.
It radicalized a lot of people to see that when push came to shove, that they were totally willing, in fact, had blueprints for making war on their own people.
So they made it illegal to buy a gas mask because if the protesters had a gas mask, their lives were okay. So this was the US, you could buy a gun, but you couldn't buy a gas mask in Seattle. She was there with her 7-year-old child.
For the future, and I have the right to assemble, and my right to
Now this is an old lady who has a letter from her government representative saying she should be allowed to walk the streets, and the police are saying no, get off the streets. Old ladies.
Telling us is that it's okay for you to protest if you're small in numbers and weak, but once you grow into a mass movement, it's not okay to protest.
Your normal rights don't apply this week in Seattle, apparently. Why is that? Because we're winning.
Now look at the media reports. This is a key point.
The director of the Seattle Host Committee for the WTO.
They interview the police, they don't interview the eyewitnesses. They interview the police, they don't interview the protesters.
Police Chief Norm Sanders talked to reporters.
Yeah, well, at least you're on the joining us on the telephone right now. She is with the Seattle Police Department.
Obviously, we feel that we have handled things very well.
The police think they handled things well.
Violent. Still, we have been and done things correctly. We have not made mistakes.
How many students were in church?
Less than 20.
Did that look like less than 20 people into it together?
On a routine basis, obviously we are witnessing that here on the streets of Seattle as certain rights may or may not be taken away due to the situation at hand.
Certainly in the face of intense provocation.
Intense provocation. It means the police were being attacked and provoked.
Very.
Not we saw.
We too share in the anguish and the pain to see windows boarded up at dozens of businesses, and you need to help us with that because if they see themselves being heroes or victims, then we're sending the wrong messages.
The cops just started running at us all of a sudden.
Mainstream journalist. Listen to what he says.
And just attacking the crowd.
How do you feel right now?
A lot better. I'm pretty calm. My eyes hurt and I can't really open them. So that's
It's not bad, but people are always have to take things
People who are getting in the way.
Stand out there and be in the way, I guess they're inviting trouble upon themselves.
If you go down to protest, you're inviting trouble because you're getting in the way. That was the view of the mainstream. Now watch this. They're helping the man up, and the police come up and hit him on the back of the legs with a stick when he's helping the man up. He was getting in the way. He was inviting trouble.
Next tonight to do what I personally call just hunting people.
We can actually see that the media reporting here is very, very, very biased. The key point is, these people had their own video recordings. They saw what was really going on, and they started sharing it via a website called Indie Media, which became the world's first independent online media, and it made people mad. Wait till we see what happens now.
Really coordinated and effective rally on Friday. We had to get out there and walk, talk.
We're going to do this, right? Let's just be perfectly clear. We're going to march back into that little protest song.
They were told they couldn't protest anymore. And so many people saw the indie media photos, the indie media footage, and they got mad. Thousands and thousands of people who didn't protest on day 1 and day 2 started to come to protest on day 3.
When it's too many people at once. Labor, environmental movement, women's rights, animal rights, every different kind of group of people as affected by this. And that's the worst mistake ever. They just got too many people, and now we're going to fight back, and we're going to fight back unified, and that's what's going to help us.
So all around the world, other cities started having sympathy demos. Look at all those cities, those countries that had support demos. Japan is not on the list.
What better place than here? What better time than now?
So, that was 15 years ago. Most of you were very young, I don't remember. This was only 2 years ago. This is the Occupy Wall Street movement in New York. Again, they're peaceful protesters, but they have been what's called kettled. Do you guys know the expression, kettled? This was something the British police invented, that they put some fences around the protesters, and the protesters who are there are not allowed to leave. They can't go to the toilet, they can't go to eat. They're keeping them there for hours and hours and hours and hours, making them very uncomfortable so that they will not protest again in future. So these people have been kettled. They've got a fence around them, and you'll see the fence in just a moment. Now, especially this girl, and there's another girl we'll see in a moment, they're peaceful, they have no weapons, they're standing behind the fence, they're not doing anything. This is 2 years ago. And what I'm going to show you next, again, the newspapers, the media, the mainstream mass media, the MSM did not cover this story until it went viral on YouTube. And it had about 500,000 views, and everyone was talking about it. Only then did the mainstream media cover the story, because they had to cover the story. Watch what happens. Now watch these guys in white. The guys in white are the boss policemen, the lieutenants, the captains. And there's those 2 girls that we just saw a moment ago. They're behind the red fence.
USLaw.com has posted a slow-motion version of the pepper spray incident, which, of course, shows there is no conceivable justification for the use of the pepper spray.
Would you like to go home? You can go home. So what the activists did is they found out who the policeman was and they put his name and address on the internet so that he had to be investigated. He just walked up, took out his pepper spray, sprayed the two girls in the eyes, and walked away. They were peaceful, they were behind the fence, they were hidden, they couldn't go anywhere. And the media didn't cover the story, but so many people saw this. And this was 2012, I think, in New York. This is not a long time ago. This is not some third world country. Now, when so many people saw that video, then the newspapers had to cover it. Only then did the police finally decide to investigate this man. And they suspended him on full pay while they were investigating. And I'm not sure what's actually happened to the guy. I'd need to check to find out if he was fired or he got demoted or indeed maybe nothing happened to him. But the investigation only started after so many people saw this video on YouTube. Before that video went on YouTube, the major mainstream mass media did not cover the story. The police did not investigate. So all of these positive outcomes of forcing the mainstream media to investigate the story, forcing the police to investigate the man, came because of people like you who were at the demo, who had a camera, who filmed it, who put it on YouTube. The things in Egypt about the man being shot, that only made people angry because people, normal people with a camera, put it on YouTube. The mainstream mass media didn't cover. The one we saw in Seattle, same thing. We saw what the mainstream mass media said about it. The police were attacked, the police were provoked, the police were nice, the police were good. Less than 20 people got injured. We know that's not the case because we saw the video footage. But that video footage wasn't on the TV. So this is where the internet makes a big difference to you guys. Because Web 2.0 means you can get news from normal people around the world, not the bias-controlled mainstream mass media. And you could be the normal people reporting on what's happening in Japan from Shibuya, Shinjuku, Ikebukuro, whatever. You could be there and see something, catch it on your phone and upload it. The internet gives us that ability. Without it, you're essentially deaf, dumb and blind. You can't hear anything from the radio, might be biased, can't see it on the TV, and you can't communicate your thoughts and experiences to other people. Now, this is where there is a problem, because now in the US, there is a big debate about net neutrality. And net neutrality means that everybody who has a website, the connection speed to that website, my blog, another teacher's blog, ICU's page, CNN's page, the connection speed of people going to those websites is the same. The net is neutral. But if net neutrality ends, the big media corporations who have more money, they can pay more money so that you can get to their webpage faster, and normal people who don't have so much money can't pay. It maybe take a whole minute for the webpage to load, which means people won't wait on it loading, they won't look at it, and it will restore the power of the mainstream mass media over indie media citizen journalists. So this is why there is such a big debate about this in the US, because it has very major ramifications for how we use the internet in the future, for us getting normal information from normal people free from the mainstream media bias. So, this is the question for you. It's Web 2.0 technology. You could be having your own blog, communicating your experiences to people and taking other people's experiences without looking at the mainstream mass media for their kind of fake stories or manufactured stories or stories that are emitted. You can do all this if you're an active user of Web 2.0. If you're a passive user, you won't. So that's the question for you guys. What kind of Web 2.0 user are you? Are you an active user or are you a passive user? So, these are some of the sources that I used. DVD is This Is What Democracy Looks Like, and some of the readings, Guardians of Power, War and Democracy and so on. The corporation's got a whole load of stuff on this, and there's a DVD as well. And these are some alternative indie media news sites. The official indie media was the one that started in Seattle because of the WTO protest. Now there are localized ones. There's an indie media Japan, there's an indie media Scotland, there's the major indie media. Some of the big cities in the US have got like a San Francisco indie media or whatever. And now other websites have followed that model, and here's a whole load of websites that will give you a viewpoint on the news that is a viewpoint that's missing from the mainstream mass media. So, that's about as much as I want to do today. I've got 5 questions that I need to give you guys, and then at the end of the 5 questions, you've got your 3 questions on today's lecture. Was it entertaining? Was it interesting? Etc., etc., etc. And I spoke about some of the things about modality and segmentation that a good presentation should have. You guys can judge what I've done today based on what you've just seen in the lecture. So, let's get to the quiz.